Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I'm happy to speak to this legislation, Bill 17. Protected areas absolutely are a useful mechanism for safeguarding the ecological and cultural values of ecosystems in our province. And in particular, of course, today the establishment of the Wasalautsun Parks, an area of spiritual and cultural importance to the Cowichan people, is something to be celebrated. This area is home to important ecosystems, vulnerable species, including certain grasses used in spiritual practices by the Cowichan people. It's also other parks where the Indigenous place names are being adopted. Scotsatquel Park, also known as Chilliwack Lake Park, and Saisutchan Park, known as Newcastle. Acknowledging and using Indigenous place names really is an act of respect and is an indication of where we need to be going further and further in this province, and I'm pleased to see this practice being taken by this government. This legislation adds 2,258 hectares of land and foreshore to provincial parks and 1 conservancy, and that's a good thing. But, Honourable Speaker, I stress that this, in light of where we are as a province globally, and what we're looking at with the climate emergency and the impacts we're seeing in very real time, this feels like a bare minimum from the Minister of Climate Change and Environment. We are seeing the loss of biodiversity, loss of forests in both wildfire and ongoing logging practices in this province. And we are seeing the impacts that climate change is having in the real lives of people in this province, particularly, as has been discussed a lot in this House the last 2 days, the heat dome, which cost the lives of hundreds and hundreds of people. And for the first piece of legislation tabled during this legislative sitting, it feels incommensurate with the enormity of the challenge and seriousness of the climate emergency. And I would have hoped to see a response from this minister and this government that matches that urgency, that recognizes that we can't continue with status quo in how lands are managed in this province, in how we look at the very serious implications of the biodiversity collapse, and that we are now a year of this government with its full mandate that it wanted so badly to implement its vision, and yet what we see is a kind of doubling down on status quo, tinkering around the edges. This is not to diminish the importance of these parks and these protected areas and these name changes, but Honourable Speaker, I think that British Columbians would very much like to know that what they are experiencing, and I would point to the gathering of youth just a week ago on yet another school strike for Friday, expressing certainly what I heard when I was in Cowichan, the sense that their voices aren't being heard, their futures aren't being considered. And there's so much that could be done. We could be leaning into Indigenous-led conservation and protected areas. We could be putting biodiversity, ecosystem health at the center of decision-making. We could be looking at the extraordinary leadership that's happening in cities around the world that are reorienting and rearranging themselves to be resilient to climate change. And I hope in the coming days and weeks, Honourable Speaker, that we will see some indication from this government that the urgency of the situation we're facing globally, but here in British Columbia, is going to be met with the kinds of legislative and policy changes that we need to see. Thank you.